A plan to abolish the police and confiscate our guns. Project Veritas infiltrates Antifa and issues information and a report. We'll talk a little bit about that. George Floyd. Who is he? Apparently, he knew Derek Chauvin personally. Counterfeit money seized by the U.S. Customs. 3 asteroids passed by Earth in the month June 2020. 1 just passed. 2 to come. All that and more coming up. I've come across some information I think everyone will find interesting. We're going to talk about the George Floyd case and these riots and everything that's going on. And here's some information I'm looking at about a plan to get rid of the police. It says abolish the police and confiscate our guns. And the confiscating the guns is nothing new. There's been a push, this unconstitutional push to get rid of the Second Amendment and take our guns for a long time, and it's something that people who believe in the Constitution have been fighting against for a long time. So that's nothing new. But this idea now to get rid of the police and abolish the police does seem new, at least to a lot of people. This isn't something that we've heard even conspiracy theorists talk about. And there's something that I wanted to mention that I haven't talked about yet. And I've constantly have heard law enforcement officials and politicians referring to these riots and the looting and all the crimes that are going on and happening associated with the protests, constantly refer to people who are committing the crimes as, quote, actors, unquote. And every time I hear someone say that, I kind of scratch my head, like, what do they mean, actors? An actor is someone who is pretending. It's someone who, you know, in movies or in plays, you know, you have an actor. And I've never, this is a new thing, this idea of referring to actual real criminals as actors is new to me. I've not heard people who are starting trouble or committing crimes or encouraging people to commit crimes or funding it or supporting it. I've never heard of them as actors before. But we have heard people talk about actors and stuff related to some of these controversial shootings and stuff. We've heard people make the claim, especially in conspiracy circles, of crisis actors. So I just find it interesting now that it almost seems like I could almost say a majority of law enforcement officials and politicians, when they reference the crimes that are happening related to the protests, and I'm talking about the rioting, the looting, and things like that, the assaults on innocent people, they're referring to them as actors, which is just very strange. And I don't want to get off track and talk about that too much, but I just want to raise that point and give my opinion, that it can mean one of two things. Either all these people are reading a script, a poorly written script, which is the less likely, or the more likely is that they're giving us a hint at something that's going on and that these people are paid actors. Otherwise, it's poor vocabulary and poor choice of words. Doesn't make any sense of why they would refer to criminals as actors. If you're an American and you grew up in America and you're not like a robot or something, you know what an actor is and you know what a criminal is, and it wouldn't really make any sense to confuse those two. And so we have a situation where here's an article, I'm not going to read it. It's systematic left-wing racism against LEOs, that stands for law enforcement officers. 89 officers killed in 2019 so far. And this was pretty recently posted, so it's pretty accurate and it's probably the latest number, or close to the latest number. So again, I'm going to use the number 2. We have one of two things that are going on here. Either that's really, really bad and it's true and real and just horrible, we need to support our law enforcement, or it's all some sort of staged act with a bunch of actors. And when I say actors, I'm not using my own words. I'm using the words of all the law enforcement officials and politicians who have been saying that it's actors that are doing the rioting, the looting, the assaults against the innocent people. Those are their words. I'm just reiterating their words. So you guys can use your own opinion and your own judgment and decide what you think is more likely. Either the police are being targeted and killed, and 89 have died, and there's this huge push to, let me look at the information again real quick, this huge push to, well, I can't find it, but to basically get rid of the police and take all of our guns, or it's all staged and it's all an act. And I'm on the fence. I hate being on the fence, but sometimes I'm on the fence and I don't know which way to go or what to believe. But those are the two things that we're looking at, and the answer doesn't seem clear. I would side towards 89 police have died and that there is this agenda to get rid of the police and get rid of all of our guns. Let me see if I can find it again. And they're talking about defunding the police and all these other things. Or it's a lot of staged stuff and a lot of acting. And unfortunately, I'm going to present some information tonight that would actually support the theory that we're looking at a lot of staged events and that there's a lot of actors. And I'm going to talk about this ANTIFA being infiltrated by Project Veritas a little bit later on the show. And then there's some information we're going to get into also coming up in a few minutes. George Floyd knew Derek Chauvin personally, and I've actually got a lot of information about George Floyd that I think you guys are going to find interesting. And the first thing we're going to talk about is I found out why he was being confronted by the police. He attempted to purchase something using counterfeit money. So we're going to start off by talking about this counterfeit money. I've got information about counterfeit money that was seized at the Minnesota border at the beginning of this year in January. Actually, well, towards the end of January, I believe was when it actually took place. But it's interesting, and we'll talk about why it's interesting. Because George Floyd was actually caught with counterfeit money, and then I'm a big follower of Brad Johnson. He's retired CIA Pentagon official. He has a lot of information. I listen to him regularly. I get information from him regularly, and he talked about some of this stuff too. We'll touch on what he was saying as well. But here's some information. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency says the counterfeit money was found in a commercial rail shipment that originated in China. And Brad Johnson's one of these big people who shame, shame, shame on China. And he's always on China. And I don't know. All I know is that we have evidence that COVID-19 was engineered. It started in the U.S. and it was funded by the U.S. So whether or not it ended up in China is, I don't know if I would go as far as to say it's irrelevant, but you can't overlook the U.S. involvement, and it bothers me that that's what everyone's doing. International Falls, Minnesota, U.S. Customs and Border Protection says its officers seized close to $1 million in counterfeit money. It was $900,000 from the International Falls port of entry, and this was late January. It says January 27th of this year. The agency says the counterfeit money was found in a commercial rail shipment that originated in China. Officers found 45 cartons of counterfeit $1 bills with a fake value of $900,000 last month during a custom inspection. So that means that the money might have actually been seized in late 2019, in December, if I'm understanding this information correctly. So sometime between December 2019 and January of this year, this money was seized. The Secret Service was contacted and determined the currency was counterfeit. CBP officers strive every day to protect the U.S. from a variety of threats, said one of the area port directors in a comment. Those threats don't always come in the form of terrorists or narcotics, but also in the form of counterfeit currency and other goods that have the potential to harm the economy of the United States. And then he thanks the officers for confiscating the money. According to the press release from CBP, a rail container was referred to for a customs examination inspection on December 14, 2019, so it was in December. During the examination, the CBP discovered 45 cartons of counterfeit currency in the form of $1 bills with a total face value of $900,000. It's interesting that they specify that it was a $1 bill. And then in the George Floyd case, which we're going to talk about coming up in a couple minutes, I'm pretty sure that there are detailed reports that he attempted to use a $20 counterfeit bill. And it's just funny that they specify in each case, and that those two currency denominations don't match. So that means that it's not directly linked to this particular shipment of counterfeit money, or they're intentionally obscuring that connection. So obviously the question that one of the first questions that should arise in somebody that's kind of open-minded and looks at the big picture is, why would China be smuggling counterfeit money into the United States? Well, I suppose the easy answer, or the obvious answer, would be to pay people to do something. Just because this counterfeit money came from China doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't sent from somebody that's U.S. intelligence or deep state or shadow government or something like that in China from China. So the information is still unclear as to exactly who sent this, where it came from, and stuff like that. We're just told China. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not good enough for me. I need more information. But it is interesting, though. I'll admit that it is interesting, and it implicates China. And Brad Johnson seems to think that this money is being used to pay Antifa. But then that would suggest, and then he's always talking about China, that would suggest that China is funding Antifa. So I don't know. But that's what he thinks. I would need more information. But it's interesting, though. We'll consider this information as we continue. George Floyd comes out now that he was a felon. He was a porn actor, and they did find drugs in his system. We'll talk about that. Fentanyl and meth. He was diagnosed with COVID-19, and he knew Derek Chauvin, which I already mentioned. And so his full name is George Perry Floyd. In a less traumatized society, a society that hadn't been lied to about the severity of a pandemic and then locked down for months, the outcome might have differed. Perhaps the American public would have learned more and reacted less hastily about the Floyd case. And that's interesting because it almost suggests that it was all part of a plan, that it was to a degree staged or planned or something along those lines, and that we were dealing with actors. They keep saying actors. I'm only reiterating what the law enforcement officials and the politicians who reference the people that are doing the rioting and looting. I'm only reiterating what they say, and they say that it's actors. Somebody should ask them why they keep saying that. The mystery behind why his coworker killed him, the counterfeit $20 bills, Floyd's shady past, these should have given everyone pause. Yes, Floyd would still be dead, but it looks increasingly that the cause wasn't racism, but perhaps an unsettled score or even a hit job. Well, I hate to throw this out there, but we don't know. I don't know that Floyd really died. And I'm just going to throw that out there. What if this was like they're saying, actors? What if these were just more of the, quote, actors, unquote, and that he didn't push down on his neck as hard as he pretended and that he's still alive? We don't know. I don't know for a fact. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that George Floyd didn't die or that he wasn't murdered. I'm just saying that at this point there's so much fake stuff and games and staged events and lies. It seems like it just mountains and it builds up and it's like a mountain at this point to where you don't know what to believe, and you have to keep an open mind and consider everything as a possibility in that case. The information continues. Let's not forget newly minted terrorist organization Antifa, who have exasperated an already delicate situation. And here are some facts. George Floyd knew Derek Chauvin, the former police officer who allegedly killed him. The two were bouncers at El Nuevo Rodeo, a club in Minneapolis. This is perhaps the most curious detail, one which CD Media expects will bear fruit when it comes to Chauvin's motive. That's interesting, that it turns out that not only didn't like know each other, like seeing each other at the store once a month. They worked closely together as bouncers, doing security at this nightclub. As the New York Post reported, Floyd and Chauvin both worked security at the El Nuevo Rodeo Club on Lake Street in South Minneapolis, and overlapped shifts on popular music nights within the last year. He was a felon. As the BBC reports, his life then took a different turn, with a string of arrests for theft and drug possession culminating in an armed robbery charge in 2007, for which he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. In the perpetration of the crime, Floyd held a gun to a woman's stomach. Well, apparently he didn't shoot her, but he robbed her. It was armed robbery. His rap sheet, and by the way, he's also a rapper. They really, don't talk about this, and they don't, it's very, very overlooked. Even in this article, it's the most minimized thing in the article, and that's that George Floyd is the rapper known as, I want to say it's Big Floyd. I'll read it as we move on, but I think his name was Big Floyd or something like that. His rap sheet includes various other misdemeanors, including theft, multiple counts of possession of cocaine, and criminal trespassing. He went by several aliases. Well, that's not good. Anytime people use a lot of aliases, it actually also gets into the likelihood of identity theft, that they're involved in identity theft. And then there's people that use a lot of addresses, and that's also a very, very bad sign. I'm not going to get off track. Floyd's toxicology report is damning. The man who moved from Houston to Minneapolis to make a clean start was anything but clean, with fentanyl and methamphetamine in his system. The Hennepin County Medical Center autopsy report can be viewed in full here. So I didn't know. They didn't say that they knew. At first they said that they referred to there being a possibility that he was on drugs, and they made it sound like they were looking for an excuse or a way to clear Derek Chauvin. They should have just come out and said that they knew that there were drugs in his system, but now it's coming out that he was high on drugs. The report also, and by the way, as I just mentioned though, the autopsy is available to the public, and there's a link. If I remember, I'll put the link for the autopsy in the description. I am going to read a little bit of it. It's going to be the part in it about that he was high, what he was on. The report also reveals a positive result for COVID-19 in April. So in April, he was diagnosed with COVID-19. The diagnosis was ruled not to be the cause of death. Further, it reveals the cause of death to be cardiopulmonary arrest complicating law enforcement subdual, restrain, and neck compression. Well, my goodness, that's a beating around the bush way of saying that he was strangled, if you ask me. 85-year-old Dr. Michael Bodden was hired to do an extra independent autopsy on Floyd. To his eye, the cause was asphyxiation. I guess he was in the movie with a female named Kimberly, which I don't find relevant unless Chauvin was related to this Kimberly. Then that would obviously be a motive, but we don't know any of that. Some tabloids have accused Floyd of gang affiliation, as well as he sports a YRT, which stands for Young Risk Takers, t-shirt at the beginning of this particular adult film that they're talking about. But they have no reason to believe the group is anything more than an offshoot of Houston-based Screwed Up Clique, a consortium of rappers of which Floyd belonged, and his nickname was Big Floyd. Well, he wasn't. They minimized that George Floyd was the rapper known as Big Floyd. You know, that he was the rapper known as Big Floyd. And then I don't know why they are even talking about it. If they don't know that YRT, Young Risk Takers, is a gang, let me look and see if that's even a gang. I never even heard of them. So they're not giving any reasons to support the idea that George Floyd was actually in a gang. And I don't know why they suggested that. It seems foolish if you don't have anything to back it up or anything to base it on. And if they do, they're not telling us. I wish they would tell us what they have, but they're not telling us what they have. Young Risk Takers is not a gang as far as I can see. They only have stuff to do with making music. So again, that would have to do with him being Big Floyd, the rapper. Floyd tried to use a $20 bill to buy cigarettes in a Minneapolis market just prior to his arrest. Interesting that they don't say that he tried to use counterfeit money, but they specify $20 bill. And I'm not saying that there's anything nefarious to that or that it's a cover-up or they're trying to mislead us. But I just think it's interesting that they specify that and they don't specify anything else. The cashier spotted the fake and returned the bill to Floyd. He went outside, returned minutes later, and the bill was accepted. Then the cashier noticed the second bill was fake and called the police, who arrived minutes later, according to the store's owner, Mike Abumila. So they make it sound like it was two $20 bills that he attempted to use. Both were counterfeit. While it's true that Floyd might not have known the bill was counterfeit, it's odd that he would leave and return with a different bill if in fact it wasn't the same one and try again. So I want to mention one more time Brad Johnson, CIA, retired CIA. He talks about counterfeit money being used to fund these riots and stuff, these Antifa and stuff like that, that they're using, basically ripping them off by giving them fake money. But that opens up such a big can of worms then, because then you have to wonder, how was George Floyd involved in all of that, and then all of this happened because he was allegedly murdered, and it really creates a lot more questions and begs for a much bigger investigation. But what was he doing with the counterfeit money? How involved was he with, potentially was he with one of these organizations like Black Lives Matter or Antifa? Now Brad Johnson is saying that Black Lives Matter, it should also be designated as a terrorist organization, that the organization has basically been taken over, and that it's being used for nefarious purposes. So here's some toxicology information. Apparently the toxicology information came back, and again, if I remember, I'll leave a link in the description for the autopsy. But it says here, testing performed on antemortem blood specimens collected on 5/25/20, so May 25th, 2020, at 9 p.m. at HHC, which I read that up above. That's the Hennepin County Medical Center. Blood, drug, and novel psychoactive substance screens, and it shows fentanyl 11 ng/ml, and I believe the ml would be milliliters, I think. I'm not going to try to guess though. And then it says norfentanyl 5.6 ng/ml, 4-ANPP 0.65 ng/ml, and he had methamphetamine in his system, 19 ng/ml, and then it shows hydroxy delta 9, 11 hydroxy delta 9 THC, 1.2 ng/ml, delta 9 carboxy THC 42 ng/ml, delta 9 THC 2.9 ng/ml. I don't know why I read through all that. I should have just kind of highlighted it and try to provide the link. But it also says cotinine. A lot of these things I've never even heard of, folks. I don't really. I'm a pretty clean person. Caffeine positive. I know in California, I lived there for a bit, and meth is really out of control. It's a horrible drug. It's the police really are tough on it because the place, especially where they make it, there's such a potential for explosions and fires. And then in California, it's already dangerous for there to be a fire and it getting out of control. And then I have also seen people on meth, and man, are they a mess. I mean, you can never, you always know a person that's on meth because they can't hold still. And then it says here, blood volatiles negative for ethanol, methanol, isopropanol, or acetone. So it looks like he didn't have any of that in his system. And it says that the urine drug screen was presumptive positive for cannabinoids, amphetamines, and fentanyl metabolite. Sorry, folks, that I don't know much about the medical stuff and the drugs. I'm just doing my best to read it. The owner of El Nuevo Laredo has claimed the men knew each other. So that's where that information came from. The owner himself confirmed that information. They worked together for years, he said. Would anyone treat a coworker as Chauvin treated Floyd unless they had a serious disagreement? ? So that's a good question. These are questions now that we're going to get into that need to be asked and that people should be wondering. How does a man with a rap sheet like Floyd's get hired to work security in a club? That he worked alongside a moonlighting cop who would one day be his killer isn't surreal or a coincidence. Surely there must be a connection. What establishment owner hires both police and felons? Is the autopsy more of an art than a science when the deceased has copious amounts of deadly narcotics in his system and is a smoker who was recently COVID-19 positive? Is a true cause of death clearly discernible? ? Will Floyd be the first patient to have the virus, die, and not be counted in the death tally? That's interesting too. They were labeling every death, trying to label every death COVID-19 related, even deaths of people that didn't even have COVID-19. We heard cases of people that died from falling, and they were labeling it COVID-19 just to spike the numbers and to politicize it, and to basically to justify the lockdown. Was Floyd high at the time of the arrest? ? Trying to pass one counterfeit bill, then trying again a few minutes later certainly suggests a lack of judgment. Even the New York Times has reported the amount of fentanyl in his system was enough to kill someone. So apparently that is considered a lot of fentanyl in his system that he had. Now, I don't know. Me personally, either he was killed by Chauvin or he didn't die. The whole thing was staged. That's my personal opinion, and I don't know the answer to that. I'm on the fence. I need more information and to see kind of like hard evidence to show and to prove what happened, because there's just been so much nonsense associated with all this stuff, and them calling criminals, referring to criminals as actors and stuff, just makes me even more suspicious. Mr. Kobalinski said defense lawyers could make a point of the amount of fentanyl in Mr. Floyd's body. Although the amount required to be lethal varies from person to person, fentanyl can stop a person's heart and breathing, he said. Quote, it's high enough where a defense attorney would argue that this kind of predisposes him to heart failure when you are on a drug like this, quote, he said. Dr. Bodden acknowledged that the amount of fentanyl in Mr. Floyd's body was considerable, which would be particularly important if he had never used the drug before. He has enough that could be a cause of death if he had never had immunity or tolerance to the drug, unquote, Dr. Bodden added. So they're just wondering and guessing now if he may have died of a drug overdose. What that tells me is anytime people are guessing, they don't know. So I mean, if he died on the spot while the guy's knee was on his neck, then the guy killed him. It was murder, plain and simple. Yeah, maybe he was in poor health because of A, B, or C, but that wasn't the underlying cause of death. So I think it's kind of redundant to keep talking about all these other things. Yeah, it goes against his character. But you don't want to, it's something like that, you mention it, but you don't want to harp on it if the man's deceased. That's just horrible. We're getting ready to take a break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about fraud that's been happening related to the COVID-19 and the riots, and we're going to talk about this investigation by Project Veritas infiltrating Antifa and these 3 massive asteroids that are going to be passing Earth in June. All that and more coming up when we come back. We'll be right back. Visit the Rudolf Steiner Archive YouTube channel to learn about who built the Egyptian pyramids and how they did it, the ancient Atlanteans and their flying airships, why humanity suffers disasters, pandemics, and cataclysms. Learn about these mysteries and more right here on YouTube. So as I was looking at this information, it looks like this nightclub where they both work together, Officer Chauvin and George Floyd, supposedly does drug trafficking and money laundering and possibly other stuff as well. And people are already wondering if George Floyd was a hit job to protect a drug trafficking money laundering operation at El Nuevo Rodeo, which is owned by Omar Investments. Muna Sabri, relative Basim Sabri, was busted by the FBI on 3 bribery counts in 2001. And then on, it looks like September 11th, 2001. So it sounds like this information is trying to suggest that Floyd was involved with Chauvin in this illegal activity that was being conducted by or at the this nightclub. And we're going to get into some other information where one of the intelligence agencies may have actually been involved in it. And then because of everything was shut down because of the virus. And then if I understand the information correctly, they're suggesting that at that point Floyd was getting low on money because he wasn't working, and he started taking and using some of this counterfeit money that he was involved in previously, and maybe that's why he was killed. Now, I don't really agree with the theory. I think the information, I don't disagree with the information. The information seems pretty interesting, and I'm not saying that the information is wrong, but what sometimes what people conclude from information could be wrong, and I'm not sure if I agree with this conclusion. What this, to me, what this suggests is a much bigger plot or a much bigger plan, because if you, it reminds me of the Las Vegas shootings, where the more you look at it, the more you see inside stuff. FEMA, you know, federal agents and intelligence agencies, and you know, they have this FEMA gun control active shooter drills, and people are saying that that's part of a gun control scam and all this other stuff. It opens up a big can of worms. And now we found out that in Las Vegas, not to get off track, but in Las Vegas, the MGM was hiding some of the people involved in the shooting at the Vidara, including Campos, for example, and Brian Hodge. So really, to me, my conclusion is a lot different. This information, to me, would suggest something much deeper, a much bigger plot. You begin to have to wonder if Floyd even actually died, or if the whole thing was staged, or maybe their conclusion is correct. It's difficult to kind of figure out sometimes. And I just came across this information. I actually wasn't really onto this, and I was going to move on to some other parts of the show. And during the break, I came across this information, so I had to get it in here for everyone to think about. And it looks like it says here that everything around the El Nuevo Rodeo, the Mexican cantina and dance club where George and Derek worked, is sketchy. So the information is suggesting that El Nuevo Rodeo, which we're going to refer to from here on out as ENR, is a front business, and it's nothing there is as it seems, that it's all a front for something else that's going on. And it says the background ownership of ENR takes you to a shady network of LLCs and the name Omar Investments Incorporation, or Incorporated, Inc., established in 1996. Dig a little deeper and something else becomes evident. The ownership might connect to one or more U.S. three-letter agencies. The ownership network has previous interactions with FBI operations in and around Minneapolis. This is not surprising because Minneapolis, Minnesota has more national security operations ongoing than any other community in the country. Various Somali groups are being watched, and anyone can do a Google search to see when those security operations peek out of the surface. And it's interesting they mention that, because the other information I was looking at, I'm looking at various sources of information about this, what we're talking about now. And one of the other sources was talking about them using this club to watch some sort of Somali activity. And it says here, Omar Investments Inc. owns El Nuevo Rodeo Cantina and Nightclub since 1996. The principal of Omar Investments Inc. is Muna Sabri, which I mentioned before. In 2001, a close relative, Bassem Sabri, was captured by the FBI in a sting operation. In 2001, FBI agents recorded Sabri giving someone $5,000 cash intended to curry the lawmakers' support for his development. Sabri was later convicted on 3 bribery counts and fined $75,000. That's a lot of money to be fined. FBI intercept in 2001. There's the capture. That's the asset creation point for U.S. security to find a way to embed within Minneapolis and assist the Sabris along the way. The presented former club owner, Maya Santa Maria, appears to be a purposeful front, a face useful in deflecting attention from the primary owner and operations. With that in mind, the scale of false information in and around the visible event, horrible as it was, creates layers and layers of purposeful misinformation and a need to control what the public sees in the media. If you consider that El Nuevo Rodeo might likely be a front for a three-letter national security agency, or at the very least a valuable inside source for domestic intelligence and surveillance, things start making sense very quickly. So this is what people who have investigated all of this very closely, it sounds like they're private investigators or people on the inside, professional investigators who are involved, but they don't want to say what they've found publicly, are providing this information. El Nuevo Rodeo also looks like a money laundering operation when you look at it closely. Part of that laundry operation appears to involve counterfeit currency, and this is what I was saying before about how, and I get where they kind of are suggesting that this could be the case, that maybe Floyd, because of the virus and he wasn't working, started using some of the counterfeit currency, and that's why he was killed. This enterprise looks like the answer to how a U.S. agency infiltrated the background criminal network in Minnesota to watch and monitor for domestic threats. So there are layers to what is visible and a myriad of interests involved. Officer Derek Chauvin is a 19-year veteran of the Minneapolis Police Department. That's a very long time to be on the force. Derek Chauvin also worked at ENR for 17 years. That's a long time to work there. That timeline puts Chauvin showing up to work security at El Nuevo Rodeo Cantina and Club right after the FBI busts Basim Sabri. Everyone remembers what intel agencies were doing right after 9/11 in 2001. More recently, the nightclub had to shut down because of the Wuhan virus, and any illicit activity was also shut down as a result. Any activity within a laundering operation would have to be paused. It would look very suspicious if the club bookkeeper was making bank deposits while the business was closed. However, this also means George Floyd was out of work, according to the indictment. So here is the statement of probable cause. I'm going to put it on screen for you guys. On May 25th, 2020, someone called 911 and reported that a man bought merchandise from Cup Foods at 3759 Chicago Avenue in Minneapolis, Hennepin County, Minnesota, with a counterfeit $20 bill. At 8:08 p.m., Minneapolis Police Department officers Thomas Lane and J.A. Kung arrived with their body-worn cameras activated and running. The officers learned from store personnel that the man who passed the counterfeit $20 bill was parked in a car around the corner from the store on 38th Street. Body-worn camera footage obtained by the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension shows that the officers approached the car, Lane on the driver's side and Kung on the passenger side. 3 people were in the car. George Floyd was in the driver's seat, a known adult male was in the passenger seat, and a known adult female was sitting in the back seat. As Officer Lane began speaking with Mr. Floyd, he pulled his gun out and pointed it at Mr. Floyd's open window and directed Floyd to show his hands. When Floyd put his hands in the steering wheel, Lane put his gun back in its holster. While Officer Kung was speaking with the front seat passenger, Officer Lane ordered Mr. Floyd out of the car, put his hands on Mr. Floyd, and pulled him out of the car. Officer Lane handcuffed Mr. Floyd. Mr. Floyd actively resisted being handcuffed. Once handcuffed, Mr. Floyd became compliant and walked with Lane over to the sidewalk and sat on the ground at Officer Lane's direction. In a conversation that lasted just under 2 minutes, Officer Lane asked Mr. Floyd for his name and ID. Officer Lane asked Mr. Floyd if he was on anything and explained that he was arresting Mr. Floyd for passing counterfeit currency. The police were called because Floyd was passing counterfeit $20 bills. And I'm not going to go through all of this information and all these statements, but there is a bunch of people, you know, people who are investigators or reporters or, you know, different walks of, or, you know, from different fields and from different areas who are saying that the official story is a complete lie. And there are people that are connecting that money that we were talking about earlier, that counterfeit money that was captured, just under $1 million. It was 900,000 that was captured by customs on the Minnesota border. They're connecting it to this nightclub. So some people are actually making that connection, and they're connecting not just that counterfeit money, but a lot of counterfeit money that's circulating through the area and through the country is being connected to this nightclub. So there's been a lot of frauds and scams and stuff, not just counterfeit money, but counterfeit people scamming, going online, acting like they have supplies for sale, and when they don't, and then it's a ripoff. So a lot of this stuff started during the COVID-19 lockdowns. A lot of frauds and scams and stuff, crimes actually went up. Even though everyone was supposed to be in their houses on lockdown, a lot of these crimes have increased. And here's some information. Homeland Security launches operation to combat COVID-19 related crimes. And before I get into that, I'm just going to gloss over it briefly. It wasn't just in Minnesota in December on the border where customs found that counterfeit money that was close to $1 million. That wasn't the only place where they've been finding counterfeit money everywhere. And I was looking at information earlier about other states where they have located counterfeit money and confiscated or seized counterfeit money. So I'm not going to, I could do a whole show just on that, but I'm not going to. But Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, said that it launched, this was last month, they launched Operation Stolen Promise to combat COVID-19 related fraud and other criminal activity. So supposedly Homeland Security claims that they're helping. Hopefully they really are, and that they have more than 130 investigations nationwide, seized more than $3 million in illicit proceeds, made 9 arrests, executed 7 search warrants, sinkholed about 11,000 COVID-19 domain names, and worked with U.S. Customs and Border Protection to seize over 225 shipments of mislabeled, fraudulent, unauthorized, or prohibited COVID-19 related equipment and kits. So if they did all that, that's good work, but they need to do more. That's not enough. And what was I going to mention? I mean, 9 arrests. Some of those numbers look pretty good. But like 9 arrests, that's not good. What are you doing? What are they doing? Fining everyone or just letting them go? It says that they shut down 11,000 COVID-19 domain names. So that tells me, if I understand that information correctly, that those were all likely websites that were scams, acting like they were selling supplies or something like that, maybe, for example. So here's the information about Project Veritas infiltrating ANTIFA and Oregon's notoriously secretive Rose City Antifa meets regularly like a business to train in weapons and tactics, including eye gouging, as well as how to engage in violence without getting caught, according to a video released Thursday by Project Veritas. And is there actually a video? No, it's just a picture. I think I could get the video link, and oh, I think I see the video link. What I'll do is, if I have the video, folks, or if I have access to it, I'll leave a link in the description for this video by Project Veritas, and I might even watch it myself. Right now I'm just going over the information that they pretty much show in the video. And they took a hidden camera in to take a look at Antifa's inner workings, and it showed what was described as training sessions, in some cases using PowerPoint, by Rose City Antifa leaders inside a Portland, Oregon bookshop before a room of apparently young white recruits. And that's kind of interesting, because earlier I was reading some information on Above Top Secret where they said something like, it made like a pun or a reference to a bookshop and Antifa in a bookshop, and I'm like, what are they talking about? Well, now I guess I know what they're talking about now. Practice things like an eye gouge. It takes very little pressure to injure someone's eyes, unquote, said a man identified as Nicholas Fooney in a recon and tactics class. He was also recorded on audio delivering a profanity-laced warning to recruits about being too obvious while engaging in violence, lest they draw the attention of police. Don't be that effing guy with the gosh darn spiked brass knuckles getting photos taken of you, he said. Police are going to be like, perfect, we can prosecute these effers. I'm not going to say what it says, folks. You know, I don't really usually swear on the show. Look how violent they are, and not that we're not, but we need to effing hide that, you know what, S-H-I-T. So, I mean, the COVID-19 makes it even worse because everyone's got masks on. So that makes it less likely for them to be identified. I think what they should do is basically just, if this whole thing wasn't all a big staged plan, they would come out and just say, hey, you know, COVID-19 is no different than any other flu. It's only, I did a video showing one of the latest, if not the latest, Center for Disease Control report indicated that the COVID-19 was being greatly exaggerated, and that only 1 in 8 million people under the age of 65 die. You know, regular people, unless maybe if they have certain underlying health conditions, or they're heavy smokers, something like that, maybe they don't fall under that category. But normally, that's what the report said. Only 1 out of 8 million under the age of 65 dies from COVID-19. So if this all wasn't just one big staged plan, a psyop, whatever you want to do, and linked and tied into all these other things that are going on, they would just come out and admit, hey, it's not as serious as we thought, or as we were misled into thinking. No need for masks anymore. No need for the social distancing. Everyone go back to work. Kids go back to school. Oh, and by the way, if you do wear a mask, you know, you're going to be drawing negative attention to yourself from law enforcement or security, stuff like that. You're not supposed to wear a mask. See, people are doing the exact opposite thing of what they should be doing. Nobody should be wearing masks. Masks plays right into crime, and it helps the criminals get away. I think it's a dumb idea, and I watched all the Trump and all of his staff recently, and And when they were at St. John's at the church, and he held up the Bible, which only, I think it's very foolish, anyone that criticizes the president for doing that. That was a very symbolic and powerful gesture to hold up the Bible. But anyway, if you looked at that footage, none of them had masks on. And the only time I ever seen any of his staff wear masks is when Fauci's around. Fauci puts one on. And I'm going to leave you guys with one last little bit of information we'll go over. 3 giant asteroids are going to pass Earth this month. Well, one just passed yesterday, or on Saturday. It went past. It says here NASA is keeping track of 3 giant asteroids set to pass Earth in June. A number of large space rocks hurtling through the solar system will be approaching our planet Earth in comparatively close range. NASA's Near-Earth Object, NEO, website at the Center for Near-Earth Object Studies reveals that they will be fast approaching the Earth this month. So they basically have this new term. Well, I don't know if it's new, but there's a term that they're using now, and it's NEO, and that stands for Near-Earth Object. And so NEOs lie between 0.983 and 1.3 astronomical units away from the sun. And an astronomical unit is the distance between the sun and the Earth, basically. So an NEO, it basically, if I understand the information correctly, a near-Earth object falls somewhere in between the Earth and the sun. It's basically what that's saying, or the distance thereof. Of course, the sun is only on one side of the Earth, so and then the Earth is round. So, but basically that distance, though they are not necessarily currently near the Earth, they can potentially approach the Earth relatively close. NASA says an object larger than about 150 meters, which can approach Earth within 7.4 million kilometers, is considered potentially dangerous. And there are talks now about asteroid 2002 NN4, which just passed. This is interesting, and I'll explain why I think it's interesting. This one just passed us Saturday. It says here, NASA JPL has classified 2002 NN4 as a potentially hazardous asteroid. Asteroid 163348 2002 NN4 that will come close by Earth on Saturday, which it already did. This already happened. It had a diameter of 570 meters, which is the length of about 5 football fields, and it breached the minimum orbit intersection distance of 0.05 AU, which we just read above together, which that means astronomical unit, which is the distance between the sun and the Earth, and which is also, so 0.05 AU is about 7.48 million kilometers. So, man, that is pretty close. Unless I'm misunderstanding this information, that is pretty close. However, there is no reason to be worried, as the distance at which asteroid 2004 NN4 is approaching Earth only within the safe limit. Now, the strange thing is, I looked for some video footage of asteroid 2004 NN4 that just passed us, or even pictures. And there is, I'm not going to say that there's none at all, because I don't know for a fact that there's none, but there either is none at all, or it's very, very rare, and I can't find any. People may have seen it in telescopes, but they didn't see it in the type of telescopes that record, and so they didn't record it, or they didn't see it through the type that take pictures, or at least they're not sharing that information. So, and then it calls into question whether the thing was actually visible. And so very interesting, a lot of questions about asteroid 2002 NN4 and why no one saw it, or why no one is sharing pictures or video footage of it. There's a lot of videos where they talk about it, so some of you might get on there and jump on there and investigate it and look it up. And yeah, you'll find videos where they talk about asteroid 2002 NN4 that just passed us, and they show its trajectory and stuff like that. But if you can actually find video footage of the actual, where they actually show it, the actual asteroid, let me know. And I know that I was reading some other articles and stuff about it earlier, and so it's a fairly dim asteroid, but supposedly, even though it was dim, it was visible, supposed to be visible with like a telescope. And then they have a certain type of telescope that I forget the name of it. I want to say Celeron or something like that. But those are really, really nice, and they record. So it's not just a telescope that you can see through, but it actually tracks and can record objects in high definition. They're probably super expensive, but you would think that, for example, I got footage of Atlas. Somebody had, they caught it on that, I think it's called a Celeron. But I found it odd that I couldn't find any pictures of 2002 NN4. And so there's also coming up, like tonight or tomorrow, asteroid 2013 XA22 is going to approach, and it's going to breach the MOID. And let me see if I can find what, and remember a moment ago we talked about MOID. MOID is the minimum orbit intersection distance. So it's going to breach the MOID on Monday, June 8th at 3:40, looks like that's PM UTC time zone, which will be significantly closer than that of 2002 NN4. So this thing's going to come even closer than 2002 NN4. And it's going 2013 XA22 is going to come to 0.019 AU, and in parentheses that translates as 2.93 million kilometers of Earth. So I believe the AU, again, that refers to the distance, basically the distance of the Earth to the Sun. So 0.019 of that distance, which is a very small fraction, which would mean that it seems pretty close on paper, but apparently it's not that close to cause us really worry. And then I just want to throw in there, because I like astronomy a lot and stuff like that, Jupiter. And I listened to Graham Hancock talk about this. In fact, I think I have a video of him with an interview that I'm working on editing, and then I'm gonna repost it. I had it on there though. But he talks about Jupiter and how Jupiter, he refers to Jupiter as the protector of the Earth. And he talks about how Jupiter, because Jupiter is so large that it has such a tremendous gravitational pull, that anything that does come too close to the Earth, Jupiter will actually pull it away and pull it into itself because of its gravitational pull. Apparently, at least this is what Graham Hancock's talking about. He says that Jupiter's gravitational pull is much greater than the Earth because of its massive size, and that because it's so large, Jupiter, it can pull objects into itself and just pulverize them. So it doesn't worry about things hitting it and the way that we worry about objects hitting us. Jupiter is just so big. And then it says here, though asteroid 2013 XA22 is smaller in size, it has peak diameter of 160 meters. It has a relative velocity of 24,050 kilometers per hour. Asteroid 441987 will also be known as 2010 NY65, is going to cross Earth on Wednesday, June 24th, so later this month, at 6:44 a.m. UTC time zone, and is estimated to breach the MOID, and again that means minimum orbit intersection distance, at 0.025 AU, which is also translates as 3.76 million kilometers from Earth. It's going to have a peak size of 310 meters, so that makes it about twice the size of the previous asteroid we were talking about. And it's going to have a velocity of 46,400 kilometers per hour. And so it's going to be about twice as fast as the last asteroid we were just talking about. And 2010 NY65 will have the highest among the three large asteroids to come closest to Earth during this month. So I think what it meant to say was it's going to be the fastest. Then last I want to leave you guys with, and I'll put it on screen, you can see what it looks like. It's called Asteroid Watch Widget. NASA's Asteroid Watch Widget tracks asteroids and comets that will make relatively close approaches to Earth. The widget displays the date of closest approach, approximate object diameter, relative size, and distance from Earth to each encounter. The object's name is displayed by hovering over its encounter date. Clicking on the encounter date will display a web page with details about that object. The widget displays the next 5 Earth approaches to within 4.6 million miles. Any object larger than about 150 meters that can approach the Earth to within this distance is termed a potentially hazardous object. So it sounds like they're saying the Asteroid Watch widget basically tells you what's coming near the Earth, when it's coming, its size, and if it's going to be potentially hazardous, or if it falls, within a hazardous distance zone.